Okay, welcome to our live stream today. We are in our infinite series of meetings about language completeness and consistency. And our first item here is about naming iconized objects. And I guess the issue here is if I do something like I say range of 10 or something, then or I say that in a list with something else, when I iconize this, what is the issue? So the issue is right-click iconization. Is that correct?
Right. Yeah, you
And
can.
by the way, in our new UX, where the pure select, that span selection will get a raft. That raft will probably contain an iconize option, right?
I know nothing about.
Well, John knows.
Yes, yeah, but that's a topic that hasn't really been broached.
Okay, but so now the question
in front of a lot of other people in this meeting.
And all right, and also let me just so we have another example. If you were to select the range of 10 and select it and iconize it, then you would get, since it's not one of the magic ones that has a dedicated icon, you get head of ...
Which is nice.
Right.
By the way, what do we do with the other?
But nonetheless, you might still want to name it.
I understand that. By the way, what do we do? What are the other magic things? Do we correctly magicify? There are probably some other types of things that we could make magic. Like, for example, if I say sum of a sub I, a to 20, for example, and I iconize that. Oops. Yeah, that's a bit cruddy. I mean, shouldn't we have some kind of plus type thing there? That'd be nice.
I think if we make it easy to name them, then that becomes less of an issue.
Fair point. Have we actually thought through? I bet we've not thought through what other things might be magic like that.
I mean, we did have a list, and we actually shrunk it at the last review with you, which was, I don't know, 6 or 9 months ago.
Fair enough. Okay, well, let's talk about naming then. Okay, so what do we imagine the UX of naming might be?
Right. So one possibility that occurs to me is there could be like a little pencil icon that allows you to, enter in edit mode.
Okay, we could do that. I'll tell you what, we could do that on hover. Right, we don't want to do that normally. We don't want to see a pencil every time you see an expression printed out. You do not want to see a pencil. Now, I mean, that's one possibility, or we could have something here where you just enter a name.
That seems weird. And
I thought I saw a UX document somewhere that looked like that, where the...
Yeah, well, but I think that's weird. And
okay, well, you would like to maybe in this state. So on hover, you want a pencil. Is that what you're saying?
Sure, on hover, a pencil, or
what would happen on mobile?
What's that?
For mobile, would the thing be like a long press?
Well, so there's a more fundamental question here, which I don't think we've ever properly answered, which is what happens if you click on an iconized thing, and not in the plus or minus area, but just in the other area.
I believe it's currently not selectable, and so
right. So one could imagine. So one could imagine. I'm not sure if this is the right thing, but one could imagine that if you click on it, that it's basically a shortcut to select the entire iconized blob. In which case, that would be the same in the touch world. And then in the world of selection rafts, then you can throw it into a selection raft.
I see. You can throw
Wait,
the update in the selection raft. You could have a field where you could type in the name.
yeah. So to clarify for other folks who don't know what I'm talking about, is what we're talking about trying to do on a 12-1 time frame is to basically have the ability for a customizable raft, which is effectively an attached cell that pops for a given selection. And there are some other applications that do this sort of thing right now, and they'll do things like, you make a selection and out pops out, some set of style widgets that allows you to boldface and italicize and change colors and that kind of thing. But I'm working on a proposal that would allow you to just basically, customize a RAS based on what's actually being selected. And so, we would probably go back and re-implement the triggers, for example, for the image editor to be, a custom setting for this option on images. And then similarly, we could have a custom setting, on the blobs here.
Okay, we have two interesting questions on the live stream. One question is, could the iconized name be referenced from an expression?
Reference
Interesting
from an
question.
expression. I'm not sure I understand.
Well, so the question there is, could you, given that you have a named icon in there, could you do a position and find the named icon? See what I'm saying? So if I say iconize, range of 10, foo here, right? And then I've got something where I have a list of, well, whatever it is, I can say, and then I say
no. The answer is no, because that expression needs to evaluate as range of 10.
Right. Iconize only lives in the box world.
Right. By the time by the time make expression is done, so we have begun to evaluate, there is no iconize anymore, right?
Actually, is it in the current implementation, is it even that far along? It might even be, the kernel might not even see it. The front end might never send anything except the interpretation.
Oh, that's true.
All right. So the answer is no to that.
Correct.
Okay. So it's similar to, and I don't know whether people really do this. I mean, I'm noticing the right-click menu doesn't have a color. But that would be another example of something. I just made two things red there. That's another example of something that's never passed to the kernel.
Right.
By the way, somebody just sent me an example, which I haven't had a chance to look at yet, of a paper where they have colored variables and claim that it's highly useful in understanding what's going on. Okay, so next thing from
I mean, it's in principle, it's possible to, create a customized notation, of course, that is meaningful and interpretable in some way, but it's not what you get by default.
What happens if I say symbol of the string and then a colored something or other?
That's a really good question. I suspect it's going to fail. I suspect you're going to get some kind of error coming back from that.
Yeah, it says it can't be used as a symbol name.
Yeah.
Right, it has linear syntax embedded or something.
Right, the first character.
Yeah, the first character will be the linear syntax escape. And even if that weren't the case for the first character, the linear syntax escape probably still is, my guess, is not a character that could be used in a symbol name anywhere.
Well, we could make it that would, so that would work, couldn't we?
That would be extremely inadvisable.
And isn't there a comma in there somewhere?
What do you mean? Isn't there a comma?
I mean, if you unformat that cell.
Right. Yeah. So
So there's a
right,
comma between the
right. There's a
effigy and the
style
ring.
box, and right. If you unformat that cell, right, you'll see that there's the open linear syntax escape, and then there's probably a /*.
Yeah, there's all kinds
Style
of
box, and that doesn't look like a symbol name.
All right, okay.
Yeah,
Fine.
no,
All right.
and you don't want to try. It would create all kinds of chaos.
All right, okay. We try this roughly every 5 to 10 years. We try this again. Okay.
But there is something that can be done around the kinds of things that are going on in Jason Harris's notation package.
Yeah, we should. You know what? We should have a discussion, not here right now, but we should have a discussion about that at some point. Can we?
Yeah.
Who's PMing?
I don't know if his package presently supports coloring, but the kind of stuff he's doing certainly could, in principle, support it.
I think we should figure out in the modern world of function repositories and packlet repositories and things. We should figure out, what the future of his package is. Who's PMing here?
Sushma.
Sushma. Okay. So can we get at some point a meeting set up about that package?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Okay. A number of interesting comments on the live stream here. Okay, so Ethan says he'd like the ability to add his own icon instead of a text name. That is a perfectly reasonable idea.
Right. So, I mean, if you use the 2-argument form of iconize, then you can, the second element can be an arbitrary expression. So if you have your favorite image or...
Okay, so picture of a tiger.
Yeah. So
okay, fine.
Not exactly the right size. Maybe we need to tweak the logic there a bit. But
yeah, well, let's think about that logic for 1 second. Let's just think about that for 1 second. Non-explicitly sized images. Don't we want to do something? I mean, don't we want, just like we have auto sizing in various places, wouldn't we want to auto size here? Let's see what happens if I do something like
could it be auto size and auto crop? So potentially use some smartness to focus on like the eyes of the tiger?
No, let's not do that. Let's not. That would be having that as a thumbnail option. Okay, so that's clearly a lose. So we clearly have to fix that.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Okay, and sorry, I'm no longer looking at the screen, but because
I did a graphics of regular pentagon.
And it came out as normal sized graphics.
Right. So that needs.
So it's perfectly reasonable to use one of the the smallest image size multiplier. We could make that work. That's not at all unreasonable.
Okay, fine. Let's do it. I think this is just a bugette.
Yeah. If somebody files it as a bug, we can fix it.
Okay. I'll do that.
I'll make a note.
Okay. So in the case where they are typing, let's say that we have this raft type approach. Do we think there'll be an input field there or what to enter the name?
I think that we need an input field for 2 reasons. One is you might want to, restore the default for whatever reason.
And so how would you do that? By deleting the input field?
Deleting the input field, or maybe there would be a clear button.
Okay, an
right.
X.
There would be a clear.
I mean, when it's in edit mode, we can significantly change the appearance, and I think that would probably be acceptable for most people.
Okay, and so then to get an image there, you would just copy paste an image into the input field.
Sure.
Because you're not going to have evaluation in that input field. I mean, do we want people to type double quotes to get a string, or do we want this to be a string by default type thing?
I think we want it to be a string by default. If it's not a string by default, then you have issues of, spacing and figuring out whether you want to evaluate the contents and that kind of thing. I prefer just to keep it a string by default.
Okay, fine. So Billy, I guess you'll be the one designing this thing. So you're probably designing the selection raft anyway. So there's just another feature for the selection raft.
Yeah, and I'm thinking about the hyperlink thing that we had just done as well as a possible starting point for
Interesting,
how.
okay. I
Yeah,
just want to see the hyperlink thing finished, but anyway. Okay, we got some other comments on the live stream here. It would be nice to add an iconize previous output option to the suggestions bar. That's a reasonable idea.
It's sort of related to our next. Let's stick a pin in this one because it's related to our next. Well, maybe you want it even for a small thing. I don't know, but that's
Yeah.
related to our next agenda item about large outputs and icon.
Right. Yeah, right. As Ethan on the live stream is mentioning that for large outputs, adding iconize to that box would be useful. Let's see.
Although actually that raises the point that it totally makes sense that copy output from above might have some threshold where it auto iconizes. Now, I don't know how many people use copy output from above.
I
I
do.
Okay. I see much more usage of copy input from above than copy output from above. But if it's useful, having something, especially if it's easy to undo the icon or to undo the iconization, having something that auto iconizes something that's large for, whatever your definition of large is, that seems useful.
It does seem very useful, yeah. So let's think about that for a second. So let's say I have a big output here, and I'm going to do so copy output from above would do that normally.
Yep.
That does seem useful. That's a good idea to auto iconize that. I mean, like if it's bigger than like a quarter of a page, perhaps one could auto iconize.
We could also have it bury into the output limiter if the output limiter was produced by this kernel.
Sorry, what do you mean? What?
So if your output from above, people might not even expect this to work, but if your output from above was output limited, and you do copy output from above, I don't even know what it does right now. Probably something really crazy, but
yeah, well, that definitely. You're right. That in that case, it should definitely iconize.
Yes, and in that case, it might have to go to the kernel to iconize, but it does seem like the right thing to do.
I agree. Yeah, I like this idea. I mean, the only question is whether we should give people a choice when they do copy output from above. If it's big, say, I mean, if we did something where even if it's longer than a couple of lines, it would say, "Do you want to iconize this?" I don't think we should.
Well, and so the prediction interface case, of course, will show that right to you. So if you kind of you for jockey and you have a predictive interface turned on, you'll be able to see it and do it. But good to help to keep our jockeys too.
Yeah. All right, let's see. There's a comment here about rainbow braces of coloring brackets differently. We have a bunch of stuff coming for nested brackets in 12.1. That
we've about rainbow braces specifically, and where we last left it, we were looking at other sorts of concepts for doing, for highlighting expressions, some mouse over concepts and that kind of thing, rather than doing something like rainbow braces.
Yeah, that's right. We needed to come back to those. Those should be on Parth's agenda for user assistance, but after we've got greening and ghosting working.
Yeah, well, they are,
Okay, fine. Okay. Allow a name to be specified to iconize. You can. It's just the second argument. Like the idea of being able to automatically iconize really long output instead of using short. Yeah. I mean, I think that there's different. Look, I think what we need to talk about really is a form of. I mean, look, short is from version 1. We can do better than this. This should be an icon of some kind that you can click. The shortened form of short, right? I mean, I don't see any reason why that can't be an active element in the middle there that you can just click on to do things with. What do people think about that?
I think the main issue was who was tasked to implement it and what tools they had to work with.
Fine.
Which is to say, Lou was tasked to implement it, and there was, it's either short or he invents his own short, which is not such a great idea.
That is not very wonderful. What it does in the pure textual system.
Right. Although, what would you suggest that it could do better, given that it's...
Well, I mean, in output form, it doesn't have any obligation to be faithful.
Right, but...
I mean, I think in output form, it should just do angle bracket, blah, 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 just like the short thing does. I mean, if I say short of, range of 50 or something here, it's going to produce angle brackets. And that's what I think Iconize should do.
But containing what?
Whatever the Iconize said. In other words, I think it should just be the output form of Iconize should be whatever it is, something like angle bracket. I mean, I'm thinking something like angle bracket, brace.
Right.
Like
yes. Although that, I mean, I suppose we could make this work, but right, in point of fact, that brace ... does not exist in the kernel, right? It's just a front-end resource. So
okay, fair enough. But I mean, that's something that.
But certainly, if there's a name there, we can just stick in whatever the name is.
Fine. Okay, so that's another action item there. Okay, can we come back to the question of short? Okay, I think we should just revisit it and try and figure out how we make that be interactive.
Okay.
Makes sense? And I think, and that way, if we did that, people could copy this, they could copy the whole thing. So that would become an iconized sequence, basically, in the middle there. Right? And then they could copy the whole thing and it'll just work.
Well, no. I mean, the point of short, actually, short is not interpretable, right? I mean, unlike
well, but Itai, the same idea could happen as happens with dataset, where it says, do you want to store this in the notebook or not? Because short could be used for two purposes. It could be used for visually shortening it, and it could be used for storage shortening it. And to me, those things should be selectable between.
Maybe. I mean, one of my worries is that, short is used in a lot of places to sort of limit the size limit. So for, if we suddenly make it where it's not automatically.
The default will be that it limits it, but it could have something like data set.
So one could imagine some way of using short that you could, rather than getting the literal. Actually, I don't even know exactly what it is that's being returned right now, but you could instead have the ability to populate some sort of template from it.
Yeah.
So I'm sorry. What
about shallow? Sorry.
Well, let's talk about that too. But John, I'm sorry. What did you mean by populated template? Did we lose John?
Sorry, missed that. Could you repeat?
What did you mean by populated template?
Well, so short has fundamentally certain pieces that you can imagine filling it in different ways. It has a prologue, an epilogue.
I get it. I get what you're saying. Right. So look, okay, can we do a little bit of investigation of short? Can maybe Lou look at this a bit? And my suggestion is that by default, it does this, that it actually shortens, but it has an option to store in notebook, and that that otherwise, if you're in the same session, right, it could have kernel access
Right.
to the information. Okay. Now, is shallow fundamentally different in terms of the way it should work?
Well, shallow is fundamentally different in the way it works. So short, for better or for worse, basically makes the boxes and then shortens them. Shallow goes into the expression and actually modifies the expression and sort of typesets that shallowed expression.
Well, the way that the fact that short makes the box. I mean, look, I originally wrote short in the version 1 typesetting system, okay, with its output form stuff, and I have no, I'm sure I wrote it quite quickly at that time. Hopefully, it's been, much revised since then.
Right. So there are in fact 2 separate implementations of short, one for output form and one for the box world. So
Okay.
Tom, I think, wrote the boxy one in C code in 95, and I have fixed a couple of bugs, but it's not easy code. And
has anybody looked at my code? Or is it still there? It's probably still there.
It's probably still there.
Okay. I mean, I don't think it was particularly stupid.
And I think Librick may have done some work in there also.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think it's particularly stupid.
I think you're right.
Also, it's been unmodernized for 30 years.
Right.
So, okay. Well, all right. So action item here is Lou should take a look at it and see what he can figure out.
Yeah, the comment I would make about shallow is we had complaints about expressions in messages being too big. And so we now automatically use shallow when generating messages so that they aren't too big, which is great, except when you get the placeholder exactly where the interesting information in the message would have been. And because shallow is lossy, there's now no way of seeing, of recovering that information.
Okay,
that was my interest in bringing shallow up into this discussion.
Okay, but fine. But what you're basically saying is that shallow doesn't do a good job of finding what's interesting, right? I mean, shallow,
and I don't think it can. And looking at the documentation right now, it's based on depth. And so
shallow is probably the wrong function to be doing this. I mean, look, shallow is a very primitive version 1 function. Okay.
Right. It's actually a combination of short
version 2
and shallow.
function. Okay. Okay, but my point here is this is another interesting thing, which is actually I'm going to add this to my list of student projects, is make a machine learned short and shallow. You know what I'm saying? So that we try to figure out what's the interesting part of an expression, try to figure that out automatically. Did that make any sense? Right, see whether we can do a better job, basically. Anybody want to comment on that? Is it a stupid idea?
Well, I mean, machine learning requires training data. I don't know how you're going to train it.
Well, not necessarily. If it's unsupervised, who knows?
But the other thing is, if it's a stack trace from JLink, then you actually just want the whole thing.
Okay, but I mean, look, the basic question is there a generic smarter way to do this? Could messages have controls in them that determine what kind of what kind of thing like that to do?
Right. So basically, right, there's $message preprint, and so what Jeremy is describing is the behavior of the default value automatic. Now, if you want to, you can in principle write your own.
Yeah, I understand. Right, that's a big pain.
But
is there any UX way of rerunning with $message preprint? I mean, in other words, if we find that a message in the message controller, okay, so let me generate. Okay, hold on a second. Let's do something like else is going to do. Is this going to listify? I don't know. Let me put a different term. How do I generate it? I just want to generate a message with a long thing in it. Blah. That was a bad idea. Okay, come on. How can I do this? Help.
I'm not entirely sure what you're trying to do.
I'm trying to generate a message with. Okay, there we go. Here we go. This is a message with which has been shortened, right?
Yep.
Okay, so here we should have something else in there that says something about reset. I don't know exactly what, but something about, just like we have turn off this message, turn off output size limiting, and maybe you should be able to do that for this message. Do you get what I'm saying?
Yeah. Yeah, I'm not sure we have the control, the fine-grained control to actually turn it off for a specific message. But
well, fair enough. But I mean, for initially, we could just have, if it notices that it's got output limiting in it, then it could say turn off output limiting.
Mm-hmm.
That seems useful to me. Comments from other people? Jeremy Michelson, since you're a consumer of this.
Yeah, my hesitation is that I actually turned that off, that menu that you're showing, because the stack trace is always truncated to remove anything interesting from it, and it also tends to hang things, and when you try to abort computations that are spewing messages, you end up aborting that
Okay, so basically
pop-up that you're...
Okay, fine. You're saying that it doesn't work as well as it should, so why don't we try and figure out how to fix it, rather than you simply switching it off? And what's this show full expression? This is a short that effectively already has.
So if you so if you click on it, then yeah.
Okay, so this is a version of short that we've already built that could be put into the main system, couldn't it? Let's explore that. Okay, can we explore what this is and whether it could be used here? Okay, and let's go on to the okay, so I agree with John McClune's point here that this is a bad example. Okay, whatever. So
just do range of 1,000.
I think I may have to do 10,000. I'll do 10,000. Oh, for God's sake. Okay, there we go.
Right. So So that I think has the whole. I think that has a reference to everything in it. So if you were to do copy output and stick that into, I think that'll evaluate.
It has a reference to out of 16.
Right.
So in this kernel session, out of 16.
I see.
Right. But there, so there are two possible.
Lou is here, so Lou could have spoken up in this whole discussion about.
I would have if I had things to offer. Yes.
Okay, fine.
I mean, yeah. Right. So there are two possible actions. One is, embed the whole thing and iconize it, or keep this view and store it. Maybe that's not very useful.
Hold on. Brian on our live stream makes the very obvious point. How about iconizing the message? In other words, if these things were iconizers rather than...
But no. Because if you have a...
Yeah, it's got to actually shorten the memory.
Right. Yeah. Because if you have, an enormous, sparse array or something.
Could it always be presented in some sort of shorter form, though, where it's just ... red message, short...
No, but the problem is this. The problem is that, look, by the time you've got messages spewing out, something has gone wrong. And the thing that's gone wrong might be generating a gigabyte of CRUD, right? And you don't want that gigabyte of CRUD to even exist in your system, right? So it's actually got to really remove it and truncate it. It's not good enough to just visually truncate it. Okay, let's go back to this, though. So, I mean, this particular motif of this circular thing, which I quite like, is
Mhm.
probably the future of what we should be doing visually for this short thing.
Okay.
And I think what we should be doing is when you click it, just like in the case of the messages, when you click this, that should be able to get more here. But now this question of whether it stores in the notebook, I don't see why we shouldn't put, that, I mean, to what extent is an output limiter always the complete output?
So so as it currently exists, it's never the complete output. It has, unless you do, I guess, show all, because what it is,
Oh no, I misspoke. I misexplained my question.
Okay.
Is the full value of out n? By the way, whoever's making background noise could put themselves on mute, please. Is the full output, full value of out n an output limiter, or can an output limiter be a subpart of the value of out of n?
An output limiter, I think, is always, well, at least as currently implemented,
Stores everything.
It's out of 16.
Okay.
So
fine.
it contains a reference to out of 16, which is why in of 17 worked, because even though the boxes which are visible don't contain the full, there's a reference to out of 16.
And this will get better when we have percent modernization, where it's no longer just out of 16, but there's some underlying UUID and so on.
Maybe.
I think so. So, okay. So anyway, look, the main suggestion is to have something which is one of those little boxes that says store in notebook somewhere here. Is that correct?
Yes, or something like that. Yes. And possibly a store and iconize button. So I don't know if those are two distinct buttons or we always want to store and iconize.
Well, do we like the visual from this? I think it's okay.
I think it's okay too, and I think we should definitely try to match it if we wanted maybe a small icon, but I wouldn't mess with it too much.
Okay, fine, but you understand that we want two things here. So there's the store in notebook question. Like if I say, if I do this, I think I will make it.
The thing at the bottom that was just added to data sets.
Yeah. Hello, computer. Come on. Wow, it didn't get it in that case. Well, normally it would have, that would not be stored in the notebook, right? Unless this always doesn't. This is still doing this. So Shma, could you please track this down? This is really, really dumb. This is not supposed to be storing in any kind of user document directory. This is supposed to be in the local object store, as I've said like 5 times.
I know that's a separate discussion. That Stephen, there's a whole discussion to be had there, which is on the agenda.
Okay.
Not today, but yes,
not today.
All right. Okay. Well, so long as it's on the agenda, I'm happy. Okay. But anyway, this didn't get its usual. I'm not in the notebook.
I'm not sure audio actually gives that, but sparse array does.
Okay. So that's the thing there.
Right, and there's if you open up the dataset example in the agenda, I mean, sort of one of my concerns is, oh, that's interesting. Okay, that did not work.
Oh, for goodness sake.
I don't know if you need to open this in the prototype build or.
Who knows? But anyway, what were you going to point out here?
Well, it's a little bit hard to point out, but basically.
Shall I look at your screen?
All right, let's do that. And let me get it open. Sorry. Zoom. Share screen.
Is there a? Oh, we'll wait.
Okay. Oh, for heaven's sake. Sorry, technical difficulties.
That's the wrong meeting.
Oh, I see. Well, then let's make sure. I'm sorry. Wasn't expecting to need
Okay.
this. So,
Doesn't matter. Why don't we go back to my screen, and then
So-
you can just
I can try to send screenshots.
here, I can do it right now.
Okay.
You see the.
So we were talking about putting iconize or store in output in the output limiter. Why not put it in the suggestion bar? Or
It's because these obnoxious people switch off the beautiful suggestions bar.
Right. So here's my point. So the store now button, it was designed to look very nicely with summary boxes. As it exists in what? Okay, so there's something wrong in the summary box, but we know how it looks with summary boxes.
Yes.
When it's attached to data set, it's this bizarre, floaty, detached thing. And
well, we talked about having it. We talked about having it go on the bottom and then to the right.
Yes.
Yeah, this has all been redesigned. This is all with
No, it's
this
not. It's not redesigned. The thing actually just the data not in notebook is just going to be in the bottom, but it's still going to be floating.
Okay, fine.
Because there's also horizontal bars to consider at the bottom as well.
Anyway, so the design has changed. So you don't have to look at this design.
Let me send.
Please, background noise. Come on, guys, please.
Let me send you a couple of screenshots.
Okay. We got some great background noises. That sounded like a pig. Let's see whether we can get to. Let's see whether there are any other farm animals. Come on, please. Could you put yourself on mute if you're making a. Okay. What are you about to send me something? Or what was the next step?
Yes, I sent you.
The generic point was, I wasn't sure if we were going to be reusing this literal button. What I saw, these all look sort of
weird,
and so I'm wondering if we need. Well, if we just need one button per context, or if we need to somehow rethink how we want.
Well, this button will clearly not live happily here.
Ticket.
Say that again?
I think for the image on the left, it's I think some sort of responsive ticket so that way when it's maybe smaller, if we could deal with that. But like you were saying, Stephen, I think I don't know if it would fit in there, but it would fit, at the bottom if you wanted. But would you want to do that, or would you?
No, let's have it merge with this design.
Yeah.
Right. So it may.
I don't know exactly what it should say because that's a lot of words there. I think you got to play around with the design because I think that these may have more space than they need because we probably did it that way because we wanted to fill the bottom of this thing. Otherwise, everything will be crunched up on the left.
Yeah.
So you may be able to work on that. So you'll be able to say show : less, more, all.
Mm.
So I'm saying.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So Lou, are those front end resources or are those text? Is that text in there? That's just highlighting, or you're not sure.
That would be resources.
Okay.
But the style changes those are named styles.
Okay.
So as long as it's text, we can get that.
Okay, so I think that's what I would do: is show more, less, etc. And then put that in there. Try to avoid having too many words, and probably don't have it in the, don't have it in the bold font like these are. Something
right.
like that.
And I think set size limit can go at the end, or maybe be replaced because that's.
I think it just be a gear menu. Why doesn't it just look like a gear?
Oh, yeah.
it's kind of a silly thing to show there. I mean, so we just say show : less, more, all.
And no iconize and store now.
Yeah, I think we want the store now, data
Okay.
not in notebook, store now. And what would iconize do? It would just turn the whole thing into an icon. Yeah, why not? I mean, if we can fit it in, why don't we have that in there?
Right. I think it would. I think it would. Try to dereference the. Right. Actually, grab the full result and iconize.
That's what I think too, which means it goes with store now because that is a version of store now.
And iconize use the default label. It wouldn't incorporate the short as the label.
No, it would not. But notice that the iconized version is a stored version, right?
Yes.
So that has to
yes
correctly.
It's not a reference to out of something. It's
right.
At the actual. Yep. Mm-hmm.
So really, what it is, it's store now in this form, and turn it into an icon, which will be stored. So I think, Billy, you need to try and come up with some designs that try to make that clear.
Like perhaps we, again, store now : current form as icon.
I think storing is not, you see, the iconize is going to be.
What happens when you push the button again for store now? Down there for the sparse array?
It goes away and it gets replaced with the actual underlying expression.
When it works, yes.
Correct.
What do you mean when it works?
Well, if you work in this kernel session.
Right. If you quit the kernel, so there's no longer a way to find what the original data was. Will tell you, well, you've restarted the kernel. I can't do anything.
Right. So that probably is a thing. We'll need that state for the output limiters, right? Because an output limiter, if you tried to do what happens if you say show all to an output limiter when you've killed the kernel?
You'll get a message saying this isn't the same kernel session that generated this output.
Now, of course, we could show that automatically. I mean, the front end certainly has this information. It's how it
yeah, this is not very good.
Changed all the cell labels.
Yeah, so this honestly, this is okay. So look, that's not the right thing, because I mean we do show that in a much better way. If I do this again here, right, this will say data not in notebook store now, but if I now do a quit, then that will change what it says, right? Does it do it dynamically?
No, but what John is saying is that it could.
Yeah, so that it should not be offering the store now option here. It should just say you're out of luck. Right?
Right. I agree.
Okay, so that's another state that needs to have. What should it say?
If you try clicking on it now, it'll go into that state when you click on it, I think. I mean, another possibility is that just the button goes away once. I don't know how practical that is, but
Well, either the button goes. Yeah, I mean, okay.
Could it start in or end in that state when the kernel gets dropped, or have an unstored state for objects that are in the notebook, like summary boxes or this output, large output on top, like a transparency thing, where it's like obviously not in the notebook.
I think it would be nice to have something. I think. What do you mean a transparency thing?
Some style change. I would leave it open to that. It doesn't have to be transparency, but some style change, whether it's a border color or.
Right. So, I mean, there is a difference. Notice how the head is somewhat gray. If
yes.
you were to copy the sparse array to a new cell, yeah, the input, and then click. You see it's gray, but once you click on the store now, it will turn solid, which is pretty subtle
Pretty damn subtle, yeah.
Right. I mean, that was the original implementation, which we kept as just another visual cue and to maintain. But right, one of the reasons why we added the button, right? So if you do sparse array of 1, 2, 3 and it's automatically stored, then you never see the button and it'll be
right.
Yeah. So the way you tell whether the data was stored was, do you see the button or not?
Sure. Yeah, if you don't see the button, you don't worry about it. Everything's
Right.
good. It's all stored. So the case that we know that is the unstored case, where what you see. So I think we do need an indication of that. I think that better, rather than having a line underneath, which is just saying, it's reminiscent of my favorite story of you've lost your last chance to garbage collect. Which is like, so what? So what do you do now? I think it would be better to just have a third line here which says data not stored. Underlying data not available, not stored. Underlying data not stored. Parenthesis, underlying data not stored.
For here, and would it go here as well?
Whereas, yes, I think so. Same thing, basically. But it would be a parenthetical. I'm not suggesting that it's an addendum.
Sorry, I forgot about the gear.
Yeah, but I'm suggesting that it's part of the summary box, not not sort of a raft-like thing underneath the summary box. Because I think in the case where there is no action you can take, having a raft is kind of annoying. Okay, that's my suggestion. Let's try that. For this, I think we've got a plan for what to do. And then we're also going to look at the short business and see whether we can modernize that. Okay, comments from Ethan on the live stream. There's no way to monitor anything in the console. Textual progress bars. Yeah, we're aware of this. In fact, this is the very next topic on the agenda, is progress bars. Long output in the console quickly becomes, in the console, you mean in the, I see what you mean, in the pure, in here. I have no idea what this is going to do. Oh, it's kind of nice that it does anything. Wow, I didn't know that worked at all. That's a good question for Sushma, for your...
Well, one of our requirements is going to be that it does for the unified progress indicators, that it does something sensible in a standalone kernel.
Right. And the question is, can it use the cursors library and actually try and do term cap? Is term cap still a thing?
Not so much. It's probably still around as a compatibility layer, but basically term info is, eventually one, and
okay, well, that's
good,
the
thing that
okay, I didn't know that. Okay, right. Okay, well, anyway, this doesn't look so horrifying.
Yes.
I mean, although you might prefer this to be an overwrite type thing, I'm actually impressed that this works at all. How do I stop it though? Oh wow, does that work?
Yep.
Wow. I mean, now with the new Wolfram engine, maybe more people will be doing this command line stuff. I can't. We're back 30 years, half the whole history.
Look at that. We did some kind of catch abort or something there to be able to print that message.
Oh, yeah. Well, amazing. Okay. All right. Let's go on. Progress indicator question.
Right. So NetTrain and is it Classify? I think
we absolutely need to leave all this. I mean, this panel is super useful.
Okay. Which may mean it's not part of the unification in the first round of unification.
Fine.
Okay. Just
right, but I think that the visual look of that particular bar going across should be, brought into alignment with the visual look of other progress indicators.
Okay.
Under no circumstances remove these. I mean, what we would want to do is for some functions that can have super fancy training progress indicators, we should move towards this type of thing for those. Okay. Looks like we have a couple of simple ones to do, so let's try that. Famous last words.
I agree that this one is pretty easy, and I agree with Constantine, who proposed this and should be in the Zoom with us. I don't see him, so maybe.
Well, let's just see in absentio whether we can.
Right.
Yeah, Carl on the live stream is asking, does the progress indicator work in the command line interpreter? And the answer is, we're trying to make sure that it does, presumably using a term info type mechanism. Is that correct?
We had not gone that far, in part because, there is an issue that, we're not necessarily guaranteed to have that available. But
can you tell if you do have it?
In principle, yes. Whether it's currently exposed to the language, is something I need to investigate. But in principle, we do know whether or not it's available. And, I don't know. And I guess I'd have to talk to John or Ian at some point about the Windows terminal, because, well, not the new Windows terminal, but, command.com terminal and what capabilities it has and how we talk to them.
Okay.
But
okay.
Right.
All right. So what's this issue here?
It's about the documentation of overwrite target, which is documented to be automatic, and it has values, documented to have true, false, and automatic. But what the implementation actually is it's false unless you explicitly set it to true, and it's not obvious you can ever have. What would automatic mean other than one of true or false? So the suggestion was that maybe we just simplify this and say the default value is false and you can set it to true.
Wait a minute. I would have thought automatic means, I see. There's no notion of the overwrite only comes into effect if there is a thing to overwrite.
Correct.
Well, I can imagine something which looks at permissions in some way to decide whether, right? Because okay, this is maybe
that tries to overwrite but fails quietly instead of noisily or something.
Yes, for instance, or alternatively, fancifully. And this is fanciful. I mean, in a world of authentication options, I can imagine something which. This is a bit fanciful, because what you end up doing with, sudo, chown, etc., right?
Mm-hmm.
One could imagine that you could provide the authentication information to do the sudo chown, which would be like really, really overwrite this.
Mm-hmm.
Even though the natural thing that you would do would not successfully overwrite. Any comments about that? I mean, look, what you're saying here makes perfect sense to me as far as it goes. I don't think we should forever kill the possibility that automatic might do something different.
I see. So you think we should keep the default value at automatic?
No, I'm perfectly happy to have the default value be false.
Okay.
I just think we shouldn't kill. Okay. Okay, actually, a couple of interesting comments on the live stream here about modular progress indicators, where the progress bar is common, but packages can add domain-specific info like nettrain. That is not a bad idea. To have the top of this be generic, and then have this be an attached panel that you can then close. Do you see what I'm saying?
Right. Right. And certainly, I mean, internally, what we would do. So the question is how to expose that to the user, right? We're not going, right? We're going to write some central function and then have all the different progress indicator functions calling into that. So,
but we probably need some user exposable progress indicator anyway. So we might as well think about that design because users are going to want these things as well.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that suggestion visually, that will be a good way of tying this together. Billy, did you understand that thought?
Yeah, I'm trying to think of it how it connects to those blue ones that we had just recently redone. Are we also thinking about maybe connecting the blue ones and maybe restyling them to look a little bit closer to this, and then having all that be connected?
No, I think the blue ones are okay. I'm just saying that what we would do here is this part at the top would be sort of a blue indicator, and then this would be an extruded piece that is the full panel, with the panel having a close button on it.
Okay, sort of maybe similar to something that's in the audio. I guess I'm just trying to line it up with other things that we have, so that way we're not.
I know. I don't know whether it's similar to that, but yes, it might be like that. To have that, but again, this is a progress bar, and then it's got some indicator to show something can be opened, and this one will be open by default, but you might choose to close it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just trying to visually tie this together. I mean, I think these things look pretty good, but they could be tweaked, and certainly the top seems a bit overbearing, where it says training progress.
It kind of also reminds me of the new info things that just came out.
Yes. So I mean, look, we've got several metaphors here. We've got this one, we've got these, we've got the info thing.
Connect with Heidi.
Right. So let's try and pull those together. Okay. All right. Last but not least, should sphere points have center, radius, and theta phi specs? Well, definitely center and radius surely makes sense. Yeah, I can't see why we wouldn't want to do that. Polyhedron, in a polyhedron, like a uniform polyhedron, for example, does it frustrate other people that it's so hard to guarantee that you're getting a new documentation window? Well, that's not so hard, actually. I see. So that's that's a prefix of r theta phi. Yeah, it makes sense to me. What happens if you just put an R in there?
Right, but of course, that doesn't make any sense for a sphere. Well, I guess you're rotating the point distribution.
Yeah, except that that's kind of a goofy thing to do, and I wouldn't think that was a. If I say 5, why doesn't this autocomplete, please? File a bug. Did you see that?
Yes.
Oh, for goodness sake. Well, I'm assuming that's correct in terms of okay, this is a bit misdocumented, right? It should show the R case, and it really should show what's in the ... I think it should say spec or something there, because otherwise it's very unclear what the ... means. But it should show the R case as well as the R theta phi case. Okay, in this case, I would think the R is useful and the XYZ would be useful as well.
Right, so...
And what does circle points do?
I think it has a spec for... yeah, that it has R, X, Y, R, and theta, and I don't remember exactly how they're grouped.
Yeah, it's the exact same thing.
Yeah.
So this is just an oversight. It should do the same thing. I think the only thing about theta phi here, which is a little weird, is the fact that this is not the unique case, and one could imagine a different method option and stuff like that. Am I making sense?
Yeah, I mean, Jose, you've been very quiet, and this is your baby, so.
Is it Jose's?
Yeah, I did 0 points. So sphere points would be the same, I agree, but I think we would need the 3 angles because this is about rotating the frame. So it's 3, not 2.
No, what do you mean 3? As opposed to, you say it's not just r theta phi, something else?
Yes, it's the 3 Euler angles. Because we can't use 2 angles to decide where the first point goes, and then we still have a rotation about that axis. It's a minor thing.
Hold on. I don't understand that. So you take this rigid object,
Yep.
and you are tipping the Earth in some direction.
Yep.
Why doesn't that just need 2 angles?
So
because there's another. No, go ahead.
So the point is that there is one preferred point, which is on the x-axis, say.
Oh, I understand. There isn't a North Pole. The basic point is there isn't a North Pole here. So you have to still determine something else.
Right. So basically, the 2 angles give you what is your new North Pole, for example, and then the third one, how much to rotate around that one.
So it's like 3 Euler angles.
Exactly.
But these angles are pretty meaningless. In the case of a 200-point sphere, the angles are meaningless anyway.
Yeah, I do agree.
I tend to think we should skip the angles because I think the angles suggest that there's a precision to this that there really isn't.
Right.
But the translation and the dilation does seem to make sense to me. Mm-hmm. Okay, one last comment on our live stream here from Ethan. Please add a separate dedicated kernel for documentation notebooks so you can try things out while your other notebook is running. Interesting. I mean, we have a proliferation of service kernels that are probably going to happen.
Well, so we at one point in time had tried to put it on the system kernel, which is the principal one used by the front end. And we ended up backing the change out for reasons. But I think those reasons have been dealt with, and we probably should put it back on the system kernel, or at least I can check to see if there are any other blockages.
What does that do?
Well, so the system kernel is the kernel which is dedicated for use by the front end. It does not use licensed process slots. And because it's only used by us and we're very careful about how we use it, it's guaranteed high availability.
But that doesn't seem like a good thing for documentation because somebody will just go and start doing all their computations in the documentation and confuse everything. And then they've locked the front end.
For evaluating examples.
Yes.
Well, no, sorry. I was thinking of running the documentation browser. For evaluating examples.
I mean, there's an advantage to being able to have communication with the rest of your session from the examples.
Right. I mean, so I can. I mean, one workaround for this is because the help browser always uses the kernel marked local, so that the front end browser and the front end kernel evaluating those examples are in sync. So one way to deal with this is to create a second kernel which is identical to local but has a different name, and make that one your default kernel, and then the kernel in the help center will be the one named current local. And so they.
But I don't understand. I mean, you either want communication or you don't want communication. And
well, the other issue is that this kernel would use a license slot on your machine. You may find that desirable because you're not using it for anything else, or you may find it not desirable because you do have plans for that license slot.
Right. Okay. Hey, listen, I don't think this is. I think this is not an obvious place to go. I mean, this question of whether you can run something, the way you can run the documentation. Maybe this is a silly suggestion. It's just starting you. Can you do that? Just start a new copy of
essentially, Itai's point is that it's not too difficult to define a new local kernel.
I understand.
Yeah.
Well, that's an interesting thing. Maybe we should. Okay, a separate
and then
topic.
And then you could set it as a notebooks kernel in the help viewer.
I understand.
Yeah.
Maybe we should make this a bit easier. Okay, let's put that on another agenda. Okay. Okay, Sushma.
Yes.
Okay, one last point, which I just have to make. After all my excitement about the fact that the cloud is working so well, I really want to push my idea about corresponding file systems.
Well, I saw your email.
Okay, so what I would like...
I think it's a little weird because of this notion of having to kind of pin a top directory, and it's, you know...
But it isn't that weird. I mean, that's like what Dropbox has to do as well.
Yeah, but Dropbox syncs the entire directory.
I understand that, but for me, this would be super, super useful. Like I would pin, I have a directory structure, but I'm trying to publish things, and I might publish 500 files, and I don't want to have a parallel directory.
But you might have 1,000 files in your directory, and which ones did you publish and which ones didn't you publish?
I'm okay with that. I'm okay with that. That's okay. I don't need to know which ones I published, because publishing, the typical thing that I'm doing is, worst case is I republish it. See what I'm saying? Because it overwrites. It silently overwrites. The worst case is that I just go through and publish it again. And that's not that big a deal.
Well, I mean, I can think of some other worst cases. You think you've published it, but you haven't. You think you've published it, but you haven't published the most up-to-date version.
I understand. So those are all things where, look, we don't have a full syncing Dropbox type system. But in the absence of that, this is a pretty good second tier, because, the main point is to keep the global file organization and not have to build a new shadow file organization in the cloud. Because, look, sometime in the future, we might have a full synchronization system. But, I was really excited by this idea because I think it gives one some of the benefits of synchronization without having to build all of that stuff. And it's rather straightforward. I mean, it would just be, you decide on a sticky base URL that, by the way, I think it's a mistake that the base URL, when you publish, is always published in your cloud. I think that should be a default, but it should not be the only possible base URL in the cloud. Okay, and then if you've got that base URL, then by default, this thing you would define a base URL in your desktop, and then by default, this thing would find, would do the correspondence, just like mount points. I really like this idea. Really, really like this idea. Okay, so we'll talk about it again, I suppose, in the user assistance and/or cloud meeting, but I would really appreciate if somebody would try and have a think through. Maybe the UX folk could try and have a think through how this would work. Everybody understand this idea at least?
Well, I mean, I certainly understand the idea. My concern is just around the fiddliness of establishing what the root is on your local system. And
I understand.
Yeah,
I understand. I agree that that's a bit fiddly. I agree that's fiddly, but I think that I agree that's fiddly. How does it work when you set up a Dropbox mount point?
Well, so in that case, of course, Dropbox is creating its own directory, and most people never change that.
I see. It creates a directory on your machine, on your local machine.
But moreover, inside your user home directory.
Well, fine. So maybe we should do the same thing. Maybe one of our options here should be store. Well, okay, you can either, by default, we can give you a directory, or you can map to some directory of your own, like your home directory. I mean, is it obviously stupid to have it mapped to have it by default be your home directory? I
mean, it could be, it could be like your documents directory, which is the default location where, notebooks get saved.
That's fine. And then you change that if you don't like it.
And if you save something outside your documents directory, then it just does nothing in terms of trying to establish a sublocation.
What do you mean by that?
Well, so I mean, if it's relative inside your documents directory, it's obvious. But if it's outside your documents directory, you can't map that to the cloud. So don't try.
Oh, I see what you're saying. I see. I understand what you're saying. Then just stick it in some default published directory in the cloud. Look, there's clearly some thought that has to go into this, but let's do it because this is going to save us. As we've all agreed, doing a full synchronization thing is unbelievably hard. But this will get us a significant, 70% of the benefit or something, vastly more cheaply.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Okay. Well, thanks everybody. And tomorrow is the exciting Wolfram Engine launch. So let's hope that goes well. All right. Okay. Thank you all. Thank you to the folks on the live stream. There were very useful comments today. Much appreciated. Talk to you all soon.
Okay. Bye.